Culture will always progress and move forward, and it's our choice if we're going to be a part of that change or not. In this video, we talk about the recent update in regards to Warcrow, the Wargame. I'll say up front right now, top of the video, it is my opinion. This video is not sponsored. It is my opinion that a vote for Warcrow, the Wargame, is a vote for a positive and deliberate shift that our wargaming culture could really benefit from. That and speculation and more. Roll the intro. Welcome to Corner Case, the channel for wargamers by wargamers. You're at the hobby desk with me, your host, your Don't Wake the Baby, and your best friend, Deck. So Warcrow, the Wargame, finally has an update from Corvus Belli. Warcrow Adventures, the app-driven fantasy dungeon crawler that was kickstarted in the late fall of 2022. It was announced even back then that it would be accompanied with a Wargame release. I think they were planning on announcing it at Gen Con this year. I'll check my notes. Those of you following this can just correct me in the comments. But it's happening. The first announcement has been dropped. So let's start with the facts. What do we know so far based on this thing? Here's the skinny. They're starting by releasing a 2-player box set that will include 14 miniatures. That is 7 miniatures for each player. They're claiming alternate activations in the game mechanics. They're claiming that this is not a game that is a skirmish game, nor is it an army scale game, but it is something different. So what exactly does that mean? We're not exactly sure yet, but they also say that it's less about individual models. It's more about moving units. So my speculation would be what is that 7 model count? You know, is that 7 individual models? I tend not to think so, and I'll tell you why. Well, first, I'll tell you what my guess is. My guess is that that's 7 models on each side in the 2-player starter set box. Speculation here. My speculation is that it is going to be like an HQ kind of, lieutenant kind of or captain kind of character model. And then perhaps 2 units of varying sizes. So, for example, like 2 3-person units, or 1 unit that is 2 and 1 unit that is 5, for example, or 2 units of 2 and 1 unit of... I meant 3 units of 2. And the reason I think this is not only just based on the language in this video, which is, units, it's also because they are talking about, or Hoopa describes that they will be using the turn tracker, which was kind of the unique beating heart of the Warcrow Adventures game system. For my review on that, link in the description. But that was a pretty interesting mechanic that drove the game. However, I can see how that mechanic can get very cluttered. As it was, when I had the opportunity to test and review the game ahead of the Kickstarter, I played with 2 of my friends. That means we were piloting 3 heroes versus the PC, and the PC at one point had, I think, 4 enemies on the board. And so to track 7 separate activations with the turn tracker, I think that was pretty contained. But if you take Infinity, for example, where a side may be fielding on average anywhere between 10 to 15 models, that would mean 30 activations on the tracker stack, physical stack, not magic stack. I think that could potentially get pretty cluttered. So I do tend to think that this is more of a units kind of game, like squads kind of game, in order to kind of keep that mechanic fun without getting too cluttered. So big speculation on my part there. I won't speculate on any of the other mechanics. So to finish out the facts, what should have just been a strict fact section, Warcrow, the Wargame, will be using the same dice as Warcrow Adventures. So those are the symbols dice. And it will also be using the switches, which if you check out the Warcrow Adventures, the way that plays, each character or hero has a card that has, switches, very board gamey kind of mechanic. And those will work differently in the Wargame than they do in the Warcrow Adventures game. Now, what is not stated, what holes, what blanks need to be filled still? If we just start with this switches thing, will heroes and characters use the same character sheets, so to speak, between both games? We don't know that. I hesitate to say that they will. I feel like they probably won't, just because, the balance, the type of gameplay experience, rather, would probably be different. You may be having an extremely narrative experience with Warcrow Adventures, and that might call for a splashier character sheet, right? But like for a 2-player game, you may want a more controlled, predictable, less splashy maybe experience in order to maintain fun on both sides. So I hesitate to say that they probably will not be the same character sheet, but again, speculation. What other things were not stated? How big the board is, so what Hoopa did say was that there would be objective-focused gameplay. So she said you don't just, run footloose and fancy-free and just steamroll your opponent to win the game. Victory points are based on controlling objectives, which in this video she calls targets. So I don't know if that's like specific nomenclature for the game, but, objectives gameplay, as a Malifaux boy, I really, really prefer, the experience of an objectives-focused gameplay. I know that every war game says that they are objectives-focused now, but the reality is, like, there are very few war games where you can consistently just get tabled and still win, as well as Malifaux does that. Even in Infinity, everyone will tell you that that's a very objectives focused game, and it is, but ultimately the system incentivizes you to strip your opponent's resources, aka orders, aka kill them. So it is an objectives focused game, but I would rather say that it is, you win by objectives, but ultimately you still have a high incentive to kill stuff, versus like Malifaux, depending on what crew, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Warcrow, objectives focused. We don't know exactly what that means, and it's relative to me, it's relative to the board size. So what does that mean? So if we're moving squads, as is my headcanon right now, how big does the board need to be? I assume that Warcrow Adventures is trying to hit a new demographic, and I think for that it needs to be more contained. So in my head, this is a kill team sized game. That might be like 2 foot by 3 foot, but I highly doubt that this would be a 4 foot by 4 foot game. That is a big board size, I think, for the average consumer, and I think something that is very difficult to box in the core set. So at the very least, that 2-player core set, 100%, that is not going to be a 4 foot by 4 foot game. What the end full-size game will be, who knows? I forgot more facts. So more facts about the game. The first 2 factions that will be a part of that 2-player box set are the Hegemony of Embersig, which is kind of the high elves. So in this fantasy universe, there are high elves and wood elves. So these are the high elves plus the high humans. There's not really high humans, but you know what I mean. It's like the difference between Gondor and like Rohan is like, the fancy humans. And the dwarves, so the amicable dwarves, the ones who will form an alliance. So the Hegemony of Embersig, so that kind of feels like the law and order kind of faction. And the other faction included in the box are the Northern tribes, which are kind of painted as like they're depicted as like a warrior culture, and it is, the society itself is formed from the tense relationship between 2 races within this world, which are the orcs and the Varank. So kind of the warrior kind of chaos race or group versus kind of like the law and order group. So pretty classic fantasy standoff. I think a pretty good choice, for what this would be. If you want to know more about the world building, I highly recommend you watch the Whispers of Lindworm series. I have in some of my other videos, I have kind of a quick rundown of them. Or if you are the type that will read, the Warcrow blog is very good on their actual official Warcrow site. That has a ton of great world building. But those are the first 2 armies included in the core box, and I think those are pretty good. Like, I think I would probably be in on Hegemony, like, no matter what. Now, the way I started this video was by saying that a vote for Warcrow is a vote for a positive progression in the culture for wargamers. Now, that is a huge claim. What did I mean by that? So first, what I mean by that is there are huge forces, huge inertias to overcome in our wargaming culture that will not be overcome on their own. And what I mean by that is Warhammer 40K 10th edition is here, and Games Workshop's MO has not changed. The way they will run their business has not changed. They have no incentive to positively progress the culture because what they're putting out already sells. So what progression is there to the culture when the changes to the game are just enough to justify a new edition based on the feedback from the community, but the world is the same. You're getting the same Tyranids, but they look a little bit nicer. You're getting the same Terminators, but they look a little bit nicer. You're getting a Primarch, right? What advancement to the culture is really happening here? Over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen, at least in my opinion, from Games Workshop a little bit, and I'm not a hater, okay? I'm not a hater. I'm just being, I like, you see these Warhammer models right here? This is Lamenters right here, okay? So what I mean by that is, I look at the 2nd edition, 3rd edition codexes, I watch Snipe and Wib, and when I look at the old codices, I see, painted by, sculpted by, So there was, there was some acknowledgement that the wargaming hobby, the wargaming culture was at some point being driven by people. The game is designed by Rick Priestley, and this model was sculpted by blah blah and painted by so and so, and this is the illustrator, and we know that, right? We know that. We idolize these creators, and where has that gone? We've seen Duncan leave. We've seen the painting team become this anonymous, faceless, right? And the face of Warhammer as we know it now is mostly just the content creators that you choose, the independent content creators that you choose to interface with. But otherwise, where is that acknowledgement of the homegrown talent, effort, and creativity that goes into driving the hobby and the culture forward? But what I see with Warcrow is, they've been publishing a blog. Like I said, Hoopa is the face of the franchise at this point. She's been running the Whispers of Lindworm series since I think probably August or September of last year, so almost a full 12 months. And they've put a human being in front of us that we can relate to, that we can talk to. And if you go to their blog, you see that they put their creators they put their creators in a spotlight. If you check the Warcrow website right now, some of the more recent articles will show you, the illustration world building process from Pedro, aka Electro Serial, a local Spanish talent, and they'll also show you the illustration and the character development from Claudia Cuen. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that last name. Another local Spanish talent. So very homegrown talent pool, and they're elevating this local talent pool. So stimulating, their local creative community, and also, putting that on display for all of us. And not only that, but, it's progressive. It's, Hoopa is a woman, right? There's some diversity. Claudia, also a woman. So where else do you see that right now being put on display within our hobby? And the fact is that I've very rarely seen women wargaming. It has improved, but where I see women the most in our hobby now in tabletop, board games, yes, but D&D. I feel like so D&D has kind of the popularity of D&D and D&D performance has, I think, created a safe space, a welcome place for women within tabletop hobby. And I think that makes Warcrow a natural place for us to grow that community that has historically not been a very large community. And I'm not going to say that this is for any bad reason, right? I'm not going to say, oh, well, we just kept them out because it's a boys of sausage. But I'm not going to do that. What I am going to say is, if we do want to expand our community as a wargaming community, then we have to proactively make spaces. And that's what I see in Warcrow, is proactively making a space for a new type of consumer. And that's why I think Warcrow, that's the biggest reason why I think Warcrow, the wargame, is culturally significant, is something that deserves our suspension of disbelief about the execution is something that deserves our push as a community because of any of the projects going on right now in terms of wargaming. I think this is the one that has the best chance of success, that also is proactively trying to make spaces for new consumers within the wargaming hobby. And I think, another thing to say is it's easy to look at Corvus Belli and to look at Warcrow Adventures, think like, oh, great. So they can leverage their existing Infinity community. I don't think that's the case. I think the reality of Warcrow Adventures is that it is actually addressing a completely different demographic than the people who are playing Infinity now. And I don't have concrete proof of this, right? This is kind of just my editorial right here. So choose to agree or disagree. But it's the feeling that I get from the community that in general, the Corvus Belli Kickstarter products can be met with some lukewarmness. I think that might come from projects like Defiance that were kind of, as some of my Infinity friends have said, just a way to get minis, and I see Tag Raid as potentially being a similar experience, just a way to get minis. I do see Rem Racer as kind of a fun new thing. And I think that's pretty sick. It's kind of a new mold. But in general, I don't think the Kickstarters themselves get really hot support from the community, except as a way to get minis at this time. I'll say the aesthetic is much different. Obviously, fantasy versus a high polished sci-fi, those are going to already be a completely different demographic. It's very rare the person who can get equally stoked by both. And then again, making a lot of choices to make spaces for women. A lot of the heroes in the Adventures box are women. I think maybe even I would say a majority of them. So this is something that proactively needs to build a community that needs support. If you're still at this video in this video right now, If you're still in this video right now, I super appreciate you, and I'm assuming that you're on deck at this point. So I'm not going to beat the dead horse anymore, because if you weren't interested, you'd be gone, or maybe you're a keyboard warrior right now. But you know what I'm saying. So, cultural reason why I think Warcrow, the war game, is very important, is something that we should support, at least, to start. This is why. Very purposeful and important expansion of our community that needs to be done on purpose. The second reason is I've been wanting to play a fantasy game, and there is no king of the hill in regards to fantasy games right now. My favorite game, I've been very vocal about it. This is a Corvus Belli video, but my favorite game, absolutely, my favorite world, Malifaux. Boom. Absolutely. No question. But I will say that genre is its own unique genre, So we have kind of the sci-fi leader, right? In Infinity, Grimdark 40K is kind of its own thing. Malifaux, the weird faux world, kind of its own thing. But there's kind of a confederacy of fantasy worlds right now. You have your AOS world, you have your Warhammer Fantasy Battle people who still play that. You have your Wrath of Kings, I think, and then Conquest, and just a lot. Lord of the Rings is still, a game that people play and should probably be more popular. But there's no real king of the hill in regards to a fantasy genre. Part of that, I think, is the nature of the genre is, just so tropey and overdone in the last 60, 70 year period. But I would like to see a fantasy game kind of rise up and become a part of that. So, business wise, culturally as well, I do want to see a strong fantasy game come to the forefront and take that space. And who better to wield that than a company that I already like, Corvus Belli, so. All right, well, this video is getting pretty long. Check out the Whispers of Lindworm series if you are interested, if you haven't been checking it out. In regards to Warcrow Adventures, if you're interested in that, I do believe that the backer kit closed in June, but you can double check. But I do think that's the reality. So at this point, if you're interested, you may have to wait. But I do expect that, potentially, let's wait and see what's to come of the Gen Con announcements. But if you're interested in Warcrow, Whispers of Lindworm, Hoopa is awesome. She's such a delight on screen, great charisma. And the world itself and the designs are pretty cool. Watch my other videos about it if you're into it. Again, not sponsored. I'm going to keep pushing this, though, because I think it's important. And again, if you are a subscriber to the channel or a Patreon or a Discord person, thank you so much. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Please like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you next time.